The morning sun filtered through the towering glass panels of the Aurelia Hotel, casting geometric shadows across its marble floors. Located in the heart of Manhattan's Upper East Side, the Aurelia wasn't just a hotel, it was a statement. 5-star luxury, old money, new power, the kind of place where senators met oil tycoons over breakfast, and tech billionaires closed deals worth millions before noon. Grace Miller had worked at the Aurelia for 3 years. Every morning she arrived at 5:30 a.m., clocking in through the service entrance on East 68th Street. She wore the standard housekeeping uniform, navy blue dress, white collar, comfortable shoes that had seen better days. At 42 years old, Grace had learned to make herself invisible. That was the unspoken rule for people like her in places like this. Be present but never noticed. The lobby was Grace's favorite part of the hotel. Even after 3 years, she still paused sometimes to admire it. The chandelier alone, imported from Venice, rumor had it, cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Fresh orchids arrived daily from Ecuador. The concierge desk gleamed with brass fixtures polished hourly. Everything at the Aurelia whispered wealth. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Grace finished the presidential suite on the 14th floor, then took the service elevator down to refresh the lobby restrooms. She pushed her cleaning cart carefully, eyes down, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The lobby was moderately busy. A couple checked out near the front desk. A businessman in a charcoal suit barked orders into his phone. A family with matching designer luggage waited for their car. Normal morning flow for the Aurelia. Grace didn't notice him at first. Richard Thornfield III, though everyone simply called him Thornfield, was standing near the concierge desk, his face already flushed with irritation. At 56, Thornfield had the look of inherited wealth. Tailored suit that probably cost more than Grace's monthly rent. Silver hair styled with precision. Italian leather shoes reflecting the chandelier light. He owned a hedge fund that managed billions. His penthouse suite on the 23rd floor was permanent. He'd owned it outright for 7 years. "This is unacceptable." Thornfield's voice cut through the lobby's ambient noise. Grace froze. She recognized that tone. She'd heard it before. Directed at other staff members, at waiters, at anyone Thornfield deemed beneath his notice. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience," Michael, the young concierge, was saying. His voice remained professional, but Grace could see the tension in his shoulders. "The restaurant opens at 7. I don't care what time it opens," Thornfield snapped. "I need my breakfast delivered to my suite now. How difficult is that to understand?" Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. This story takes an unexpected turn you won't want to miss. Michael glanced toward the restaurant entrance, clearly calculating his options. "Sir, I can certainly contact room service." "I've already called room service twice. Nobody answers." Thornfield's volume increased. Several heads turned. "What kind of establishment is this? Do you have any idea who I am?" That's when it happened. Grace's cleaning cart, positioned beside a marble column, had one wheel slightly turned. As a guest walked past, a woman in a hurry pulling a suitcase, her luggage bumped the cart's corner. Just barely. But it was enough. The cart rolled. Not far. Maybe 3 feet. But those 3 feet were directly into Thornfield's path as he turned away from the concierge desk, still fuming. The collision was minimal. The cart's corner touched his leg. Didn't even scuff his shoes. But Thornfield reacted as if he'd been assaulted. "What the hell?" He spun around, eyes blazing. "Who?" His gaze landed on Grace. She stood frozen, hands still gripping the cart handle, eyes wide. "I'm so sorry, sir," Grace began, her voice quiet. "The cart, it just—" "You incompetent fool." Thornfield's face darkened from flush to crimson. "Do you have any idea what these shoes cost, do you?" Grace's mouth opened, but no words came out. Around them, the lobby's normal sounds faded. Conversation stopped. People turned to watch. I didn't mean to..." Grace tried again. "Didn't mean to?" Thornfield stepped closer, his voice rising with each word. "You people never do. You walk around here with your carts completely oblivious, no regard for anyone else. This is the Aurelia, not some budget motel. We have standards here." Michael moved toward them. "Sir, please, don't." Thornfield held up a hand, not even looking at the concierge. His eyes remained fixed on Grace. "This is about basic competence, basic attention, basic respect for guests who actually matter in this establishment." Grace felt her face burning. She could feel every eye in the lobby on her. The businessman with the phone had stopped talking. The family with the luggage stared openly. Even the front desk staff had frozen mid-keystroke. It was an accident, Grace managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I apologize. An accident? Thornfield's laugh was harsh. An accident is what happens when competent people make mistakes. This is what happens when unqualified staff are allowed to work in places they don't belong. The words hit like physical blows. Grace felt something crack inside her chest, not just embarrassment, but something deeper. Shame. The kind that makes you want to disappear. Mr. Thornfield. Michael tried again, his voice firmer now. Sir, I'm sure we can. Can what? Thornfield wheeled on him. Can what, exactly? Can continue to employ people who can't even push a cart without causing problems? Can continue to lower our standards until the Aurelia becomes just another mediocre hotel? Grace's hands trembled on the cart handle. She wanted to run, wanted to push her cart away, disappear into the service corridors, maybe keep going until she reached the street, but her legs wouldn't move. She stood there frozen while this man, this rich, powerful man, continued to tear her apart in front of everyone. I work very hard, Grace heard herself say. The words came out small, defeated. Every day, I work hard. Hard? Thornfield scoffed. Working hard means doing your job correctly. It means paying attention. It means treating people with basic human dignity. The new voice came from across the lobby. Male, calm, but with an edge that made everyone turn. Near the elevators, previously unnoticed in a leather armchair, sat a man. African-American, perhaps in his early 60s, wearing casual clothes, jeans, a simple button-down shirt, reading glasses perched on his nose. He'd been reading a newspaper. Now he stood, folding the paper carefully, his movements deliberate. He walked toward them, not hurried, not aggressive, just purposeful. Thornfield stared at him, momentarily thrown off balance. Excuse me? The man stopped a few feet away. His eyes, dark, intelligent, penetrating, moved from Thornfield to Grace, then back to Thornfield. You're excused, the man said quietly, though I don't think that's what you meant to ask. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the sounds from outside, traffic, sirens, the pulse of New York, seemed to fade. Everyone watched this unlikely confrontation, the wealthy white man in his expensive suit, and this quiet black man in everyday clothes. Thornfield recovered quickly. This doesn't concern you, doesn't it? The man tilted his head slightly. See, I'm a guest here too. Been staying at the Aurelia for 2 weeks now, paid good money for my room, and I'm watching another guest abuse staff over what amounts to absolutely nothing. Nothing? Thornfield's voice rose again. She crashed her cart into me. I saw what happened, the man said. His voice remained level, but something in his tone made people lean forward to hear better. A cart rolled maybe 3 feet, barely touched you. Could have happened to anyone, but instead of accepting a simple apology, you chose to publicly humiliate a woman who was just doing her job. How dare you? How dare I? The man's eyebrows rose. How dare I what? Point out that you're behaving badly? Call out obvious cruelty? Suggest that wealth doesn't entitle you to degrade other human beings? Thornfield's face went purple. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I know exactly who you are, Mr. Thornfield. The man's expression didn't change. Question is, do you? Something in those words made Thornfield pause. Made everyone pause. The man wasn't threatening, wasn't loud, but somehow he commanded the entire space. Who are you? Thornfield demanded. The man smiled slightly. Right now, I'm just another guest who's tired of watching powerful people abuse the powerless. That's all you need to know. He turned to Grace, his expression softening. Ma'am, are you all right? Grace nodded, unable to speak. Tears had formed in her eyes, though she fought them back. What's your name? Grace. Grace Miller. Ms. Miller. The man's voice was gentle. You didn't do anything wrong, you understand that, right? Before Grace could answer, Thornfield exploded. This is outrageous. I want management involved immediately. You want what? The man turned back to him. To get this woman fired? To make sure your tantrum has consequences for everyone except you? I will have your name. Thornfield was shaking now, pointing his finger. I will find out who you are and I will... You'll what? The man's voice dropped lower, quieter, somehow more dangerous. Make a phone call? Use your connections? Try to hurt me somehow? He stepped closer to Thornfield, just one step, but it changed everything. Here's what you don't understand, Mr. Thornfield. Power isn't about how loud you can yell. It's not about how much money you have or who you know or what threats you can make. He paused. Real power is knowing when to use your voice to lift people up instead of tear them down. The lobby remained frozen. Somewhere a phone rang at the front desk. Nobody answered it. "This conversation is over," Thornfield said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I'm going to my suite, and I expect a full investigation into this incident." He turned to leave, but the man's next words stopped him cold. "Before you go, Mr. Thornfield, one more thing." Thornfield looked back suspicious. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it he extracted a business card. He held it between two fingers, not offering it, just displaying it. "My name is James Carter. Most people call me Judge Carter. I've been on the federal bench for 23 years. I've heard thousands of cases involving discrimination, workplace harassment, civil rights violations." He paused. "You might want to think about that before you decide how to proceed here." The color drained from Thornfield's face. Judge Carter slipped the card back into his wallet. "The investigative process works both ways. You want to report this incident? Go ahead. File your complaint. But understand, I'll be filing one too. About what I witnessed, the words I heard, the discrimination I observed." He glanced around the lobby, making eye contact with several guests, with staff members, with anyone watching. "And I'm not the only witness here." Thornfield stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, without another word, he turned and walked toward the elevators. His stride was stiff, his shoulders rigid. The elevator doors closed behind him with a soft chime. The lobby erupted in whispered conversations, but Judge Carter ignored them all. He turned back to Grace, who was openly crying now, but these were different tears. "Miss Miller," he said gently, "you're going to be fine. Better than fine." Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Thank you so much. I couldn't. "You didn't need to," Judge Carter said. "Sometimes the bravest thing is just standing there with dignity while someone tries to take it from you. You did that." Michael, the concierge, approached hesitantly. "Sir, Judge Carter, I want to apologize on behalf of the hotel. Mr. Thornfield's behavior was completely unacceptable." "It wasn't your fault," Judge Carter replied. "But I'd suggest your management have a conversation with Mr. Thornfield about appropriate conduct. Or better yet, consider whether someone who treats staff this way deserves the privilege of staying at the Aurelia." Michael nodded vigorously. "I'll make sure the general manager is informed immediately." Judge Carter picked up his newspaper from the chair where he'd been sitting. He looked at Grace one more time. "Keep your head up, Ms. Miller. You belong here just as much as anyone else." As he walked toward the elevators, the lobby slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed. People moved, but something had shifted. Everyone who'd witnessed what happened would remember it, would talk about it, would think differently about moments like these. Grace stood by her cleaning cart, still trembling slightly, but no longer from fear or shame. She watched Judge Carter disappear into the elevator, this quiet man who'd stood up when no one else would. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this single confrontation in a hotel lobby would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone involved. Because Judge James Carter hadn't told the complete truth. He wasn't just a guest at the Aurelia. And Richard Thornfield III was about to discover exactly what happens when you humiliate the wrong person in front of the wrong witness. The game had just begun. Grace's hands still trembled as she pushed her cleaning cart down the service corridor. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, a sound she'd never really noticed before, but now it seemed deafening in the silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The confrontation in the lobby kept replaying in her mind like a video stuck on loop. "You people never do," Thornfield's words echoed. Not just the words themselves, but the venom behind them, the contempt. Grace had experienced racism before. Subtle slights, uncomfortable looks, comments disguised as jokes. But this public degradation, it cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She reached the housekeeping supply room and stopped. Her supervisor, Maria Rodriguez, looked up from her clipboard. At 58, Maria had worked at the Aurelia longer than anyone in housekeeping, nearly 20 years. She'd seen everything. "Grace?" Maria's expression shifted immediately from professional to concerned. "What happened?" Grace tried to speak, but her throat closed. She shook her head. Maria set down her clipboard and guided Grace to a folding chair in the corner. "Sit. Breathe. Tell me." The story came out in fragments. The cart, Thornfield's rage, the words, the shame. And then, Judge Carter, the stranger who'd stepped in when no one else would. Maria listened without interrupting. When Grace finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Thornfield," Maria finally said, her voice hard. "That man is poison. Always has been. You know him? Everyone in housekeeping knows him." Maria's jaw tightened. "He's complained about staff 17 times in the past 3 years. Gotten 4 people written up. One girl, Carmen, sweet kid, only 19, he got her fired last year. Said she stole jewelry from his suite." Grace's stomach dropped. "Did she?" "No." Maria's eyes flashed. Hotel security reviewed the footage. Turned out Thornfield had moved his own cufflinks and forgotten. But by then, Carmen was already gone. Her name was already marked. She couldn't get hired anywhere decent after that. The words settled like stones in Grace's chest. She could have been Carmen. Could have been fired, blacklisted, destroyed, all because a rich man had a bad morning. But this Judge Carter, Grace said, he stopped it. He stood up to Thornfield. Maria nodded slowly. "That doesn't happen. People like Thornfield, they're untouchable in places like this. Money talks. The rest of us just learn to duck." A knock on the doorframe made them both turn. Michael, the concierge, stood in the doorway. He looked nervous. "Miss Miller, I'm sorry to interrupt. The general manager wants to see you." Grace's blood turned cold. "Am I?" "No," Michael said quickly. "No, you're not in trouble. Mr. Harrison just wants to talk to you about what happened. He's very concerned." Maria squeezed Grace's shoulder. "Go, and Grace? Tell him everything. Don't leave anything out." David Harrison's office occupied a quiet corner on the 2nd floor, overlooking Central Park. At 45, he'd been the Aurelia's general manager for 7 years. The hotel ran like clockwork under his leadership. Staff retention was high. Guest satisfaction scores were exceptional. Profits were steady. He'd built his reputation on maintaining excellence without drama. Today was bringing him plenty of drama. Grace sat in the leather chair across from his desk, hands folded in her lap. Harrison sat forward, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Ms. Miller, first I want to apologize." His voice was firm. "What Mr. Thornfield did in that lobby was completely unacceptable. There's no excuse for speaking to any member of our staff that way." Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. "I've reviewed the security footage," Harrison continued. "Multiple angles. The card incident was clearly accidental, barely even that. A minor bump at most, Mr. Thornfield's reaction was..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Disproportionate. Am I going to lose my job?" Grace heard herself ask. "Absolutely not." Harrison's response was immediate. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing. In fact, I'm more concerned about how you're doing. This kind of public confrontation can be traumatic." Something in Grace's chest loosened slightly. "I'm okay, I think. It's just that he had no right to speak to you that way," Harrison finished. "And he won't again. I'm having a conversation with Mr. Thornfield this afternoon. There will be consequences." Grace blinked. "Consequences? For him?" "For him." Harrison's expression hardened. "The Aurelia has a code of conduct. It applies to guests as much as staff. Permanent residence here is a privilege, not a right. Mr. Thornfield needs to understand that." Grace wanted to believe him, but she'd worked in hotels long enough to know how the world worked. Rich guests didn't face consequences. They made them. "There's something else," Harrison said. "Judge Carter, the gentleman who intervened, he's requested to speak with you, if you're comfortable with that." "He wants to talk to me?" Grace felt a flutter of anxiety. "Why?" "He didn't say." "But Grace?" Harrison leaned forward. "Judge James Carter is not just any guest. He's a federal judge. Very respected. Very influential. If he wants to talk to you, I'd strongly suggest you listen to what he has to say." 20 minutes later, Grace found herself in the Aurelia's private lounge, a space reserved for VIP guests. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the park. Original artwork hung on the walls. Everything smelled like expensive leather and old money. Judge Carter sat in an armchair near the window, still wearing the same casual clothes from earlier. He stood when Grace entered, offering a warm smile. "Ms. Miller, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "I should be thanking you," Grace said quietly. "What you did in the lobby was the bare minimum." Judge Carter gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit." Grace sat, feeling out of place in this elegant room. Judge Carter settled back into his chair, studying her with those intelligent eyes. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "What happened this morning wasn't just rude behavior. It was discriminatory harassment. Thornfield's language, 'you people,' questioning whether you belong here. That crosses a legal line. Grace's throat tightened. I don't want to make trouble. You're not making trouble, he made trouble. Judge Carter's voice was gentle but firm. Grace, may I call you Grace? She nodded. Grace, I've spent my entire career fighting against exactly what happened to you today. People using power to humiliate others, using wealth as a weapon, treating other human beings as less than because of their race, their job, their position in society. He paused. I can't let it slide, not when I witness it firsthand. But he's Richard Thornfield. Grace heard the defeat in her own voice. He has money, lawyers, connections. What can someone like me? Someone like you has rights. Judge Carter interrupted. Constitutional rights, civil rights, and you have something else. You have the truth and you have witnesses, including a federal judge who will testify to exactly what he saw and heard. Grace stared at him. You'd do that? For me? I'd do that for justice. Judge Carter's expression softened. But yes, Grace, for you too. Because what happened to you matters. You matter. Tears pricked Grace's eyes again. She blinked them back. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. Judge Carter reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, different from the one he'd shown Thornfield. This one had multiple phone numbers, an email address. Think about it. Talk to your family. But if you decide you want to file a formal complaint, civil rights violation, workplace harassment, anything, call me. I have resources, connections to excellent civil rights attorneys who work pro bono for cases like this. Grace took the card with shaking fingers. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Judge Carter was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. 35 years ago, I was a young public defender in Chicago. Eager, idealistic, ready to change the world. He smiled sadly. One day, I was in a courthouse elevator wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I'd been doing weekend research, nothing official. A white lawyer got on, saw me and assumed I was a janitor. Started talking to me like I was an idiot. Ordered me to hold the door, fetch his coffee, treat him like a king. Grace's breath caught. When we got to his floor and he walked out, I followed him, into the same courtroom where I was scheduled to argue a motion. Judge Carter's smile turned sharp. You should have seen his face when he realized who I was. What happened? I won my motion. He lost his case, and he never looked at anyone in an elevator the same way again. Judge Carter leaned forward. Grace, I learned something that day. People like Thornfield, they think they're invincible. They think wealth and status protect them from consequences. Sometimes they're right, but sometimes, he paused, sometimes they pick the wrong person to humiliate in front of the wrong witness. A chill ran down Grace's spine. Something in Judge Carter's tone suggested there was more to this story. More he wasn't saying yet. Is there something you're not telling me? She asked. Judge Carter smiled. A genuine smile this time, with a hint of something that might have been mischief. There's a lot I'm not telling you, but not because I'm hiding it, just because the time isn't right yet. The time for what? For Mr. Thornfield to learn an important lesson about power, privilege, and the consequences of cruelty. Judge Carter stood. Go home, Grace. Rest. Process what happened. And remember, you did nothing wrong. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Grace stood too, clutching the business card. Thank you, Judge Carter, for everything. James, he corrected gently. Call me James. And Grace, one more thing. Yes? His expression turned serious. Be prepared. Men like Thornfield don't accept humiliation quietly. He's going to push back, probably hard. But when he does, Judge Carter's eyes glinted. That's when things get interesting. 3 floors above them in his penthouse suite, Richard Thornfield III paced like a caged animal. His phone was pressed to his ear, his face still flushed with rage. I don't care what it costs, he snarled into the phone. Find out everything about this Judge James Carter. Where he works, who he knows, what cases he's handled, everything. His private investigator, a man he kept on retainer for exactly these situations, responded with something that made Thornfield pause. What do you mean? Which one? Thornfield demanded. The investigator's answer made Thornfield's blood run cold. There were 3 Judge James Carters in the federal system. The one in Manhattan, the one currently staying at the Aurelia, was not just any federal judge. He was the Judge James Carter, the one who'd written the landmark decision on workplace discrimination 3 years ago. The one whose rulings had cost corporations hundreds of millions in settlements. The one whose name made employment lawyers wake up in cold sweats. And Thornfield had just humiliated a black housekeeper in front of him while using language that could easily be construed as racist. Thornfield ended the call with shaking hands. He walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Manhattan. From up here, the city looked small, manageable, under his control. But for the first time in years, Richard Thornfield III felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Fear, because Judge James Carter hadn't told him everything in that lobby, hadn't revealed the full truth about why he was really staying at the Aurelia. And by the time Thornfield discovered the real reason, it would be far too late. The game wasn't just beginning. Thornfield had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. Grace didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small studio apartment in Queens, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The cart, Thornfield's face, Judge Carter's calm voice cutting through the chaos. The business card sat on her nightstand, catching streetlight from the window. At 2:47 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Call me when you wake up. Important." Grace called immediately. "Maria? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Maria's voice was hushed, excited. "Everything's right." "Grace, do you know who else Judge Carter talked to today?" "Who?" "Everyone." Maria laughed, a sound Grace rarely heard from her supervisor. "He spent 3 hours interviewing housekeeping staff, asked about working conditions, treatment by guests, any incidents of harassment or discrimination. He talked to Carmen, remember her? The girl Thornfield got fired. Judge Carter tracked her down, got her full statement." Grace sat up in bed. "Why would he do that?" "Because he's not just a guest, Grace. I did some research." Papers rustled on Maria's end. "Judge James Carter isn't just any federal judge. He's famous. 3 years ago, he presided over Patterson vs. Meridian Hotels, the biggest workplace discrimination case in hospitality industry history. The hotel chain had to pay $87 million in damages." Grace's mouth went dry. $87 million? And that was just one case. He's handled dozens. He's known for going after powerful people who abuse service workers. Maria paused. "Grace, I don't think he's at the Aurelia by accident." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. A federal judge, famous for workplace discrimination cases, just happens to be sitting in the lobby when Thornfield has a racist meltdown? Just happens to witness everything? Just happens to intervene?" Maria's voice dropped. "Girl, I think Judge Carter has been investigating the Aurelia, and we just gave him his star witness." Grace's mind raced. "But why would he investigate our hotel?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." Maria yawned. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." But Grace didn't sleep. She lay there, questions multiplying in her mind until dawnlight crept through her window. At 8:30 a.m., David Harrison sat in his office across from someone he'd never expected to face. Rebecca Chen, the Aurelia's owner. She'd flown in from Singapore overnight. That alone told Harrison how serious the situation had become. Rebecca was 62, elegant and terrifyingly sharp. She'd built her hotel empire from nothing, starting with a single bed and breakfast in Taipei and expanding to luxury properties on 4 continents. The Aurelia was her crown jewel. "Explain," she said simply. Harrison explained. The incident, the footage, Judge Carter's intervention, Thornfield's behavior. When he finished, Rebecca was silent for a long moment. "Show me the video." Harrison played the security footage on his laptop. Rebecca watched without expression. When it ended, she replayed it. Then again. On the 4th viewing, she paused on Thornfield's face, frozen in mid-shout, his expression twisted with contempt. "How long has Richard Thornfield owned his suite?" Rebecca asked. 7 years. "How much has he spent here in that time?" Harrison pulled up the file, including the suite purchase, renovations, services, dining, events. Approximately $42 million. "And how many complaints has he generated?" 17 formal complaints. Another 32 informal incidents that staff didn't officially report. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. 32 incidents that weren't reported. Why not? Because staff were afraid. Thornfield has influence. He's threatened people's jobs before, made it clear he could make life difficult for anyone who crossed him. "I see." Rebecca closed the laptop. "And Judge Carter? What's his story?" Harrison hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. He checked in 2 weeks ago, booked a junior suite for a month, paid cash, unusual for a guest of his caliber. He's been quiet, observant, spending a lot of time in public areas, like he's watching something." Exactly like that. Harrison met Rebecca's gaze. "Ma'am, I think Judge Carter has been conducting an investigation. I think he's been gathering evidence about working conditions, guest behavior, staff treatment, and yesterday's incident with Grace Miller." I think that was exactly what he was waiting for. Rebecca stood, walking to the window. Outside, Manhattan gleamed in morning sunlight. Do you know why I named this hotel the Aurelia? Harrison shook his head. It was my grandmother's name. She worked as a maid in Taipei her entire life. Cleaned houses for wealthy families who treated her like furniture. Invisible. Disposable. Rebecca's voice hardened. She died at 63, her hands permanently scarred from harsh chemicals, her back bent from years of scrubbing floors. When I opened this hotel, I swore it would honor her memory, that no one who worked here would ever be treated the way she was. She turned back to Harrison. I've failed her. Ma'am, don't. Rebecca's tone was sharp. 17 formal complaints, David. 32 informal incidents. That means 32 times someone on my staff was mistreated and felt too afraid to report it. That's not Richard Thornfield's failure. That's mine. Harrison said nothing. She was right. Here's what's going to happen, Rebecca said. First, you're going to arrange a meeting between me and Judge Carter. Today. Second, you're going to pull every complaint, every incident report, every piece of documentation involving Richard Thornfield. Third, she paused. Third, you're going to begin termination proceedings for his residency. Harrison's jaw dropped. Ma'am, he owns that suite. He paid $3 million for it. And the Aurelia's bylaws include a morality clause. Section 14, subsection C. Residents can be removed for conduct detrimental to the hotel's reputation or harmful to staff welfare. Rebecca's smile was cold. Read him the paperwork. Richard Thornfield is no longer welcome in my hotel. He'll sue. Let him. Rebecca's eyes flashed. I'll spend every dollar I have fighting him. And Grace Miller? Promote her, double her salary, and make sure she knows she has my full support if she chooses to take legal action against Thornfield. Harrison stared at his boss with new respect. You're really doing this? My grandmother spent her life being invisible to people like Richard Thornfield. I won't let that happen here. Rebecca checked her watch. Set up that meeting with Judge Carter. I want to know exactly what he's uncovered. And David, whatever he found, I want to fix it. At 11 a.m., Grace returned to the Aurelia for her shift. Her stomach churned as she walked through the employee entrance. What if Thornfield was waiting? What if he'd found a way to get her fired despite Harrison's assurances? But the moment she entered the housekeeping area, something felt different. Staff stopped what they were doing, looked at her, then someone started clapping. Maria, then another housekeeper, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. Grace stood frozen, confused. What? You're a hero, Maria said, grinning. Everyone's talking about what happened. How you stood there with dignity while Thornfield attacked you. How Judge Carter defended you. She squeezed Grace's shoulder. You showed us all that we don't have to take abuse from anyone, not even the rich guests. Tears stung Grace's eyes. I didn't do anything special. You survived. An older woman named Dorothy stepped forward. She'd worked at the Aurelia for 15 years. You survived being humiliated by a powerful man, and you kept your dignity. That's everything, honey, that's everything. Before Grace could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway. Miss Miller? Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. Grace's heart jumped. Who? Judge Carter, he's waiting in the private lounge. Judge Carter stood when Grace entered, but this time he wasn't alone. A younger woman sat beside him, African American, maybe 35, wearing a sharp business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Grace, thank you for coming. Judge Carter gestured to the woman. This is attorney Michelle Thompson. She specializes in civil rights and employment discrimination cases. Michelle stood, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. Ms. Miller, it's an honor to meet you. I don't understand, Grace said. Why is there an attorney? Because what happened to you isn't just going away, Judge Carter said gently. Thornfield is already making moves. He's hired a private investigator to dig into your background. He's preparing to file a countersuit claiming you deliberately assaulted him with your cleaning cart. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. What? It's a common tactic, Michelle said, her voice calm and professional. Powerful people accused of wrongdoing try to flip the narrative, make themselves the victim. But here's the thing, Ms. Miller, they made a critical mistake. What mistake? Judge Carter smiled. They picked the wrong witness. I'm not just testifying to what I saw. I'm also revealing why I was really here. Grace looked between them. Why were you here? 2 months ago, the Department of Justice received an anonymous complaint about the Aurelia, Judge Carter said. Multiple allegations of discriminatory practices, hostile work environment, Systemic racism among certain permanent residents. The DOJ asked me to conduct a preliminary investigation. Off the books, undercover. Grace's legs felt weak. She sat down. You've been investigating the hotel? Investigating patterns of behavior. Thornfield wasn't the only problem, but he was the biggest one. Judge Carter leaned forward. Grace, I've been documenting incidents for 2 weeks. I have statements from 17 current employees and 8 former employees, including Carmen, the young woman Thornfield got fired. I have recordings of conversations, security footage analysis, financial records showing patterns of discrimination in tipping and service charges. Yesterday's incident, Michelle continued, was the final piece. A clear, documented witness case of racial harassment. Multiple cameras, multiple witnesses, and a federal judge who can testify to every word spoken. She opened her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. Ms. Miller, we're not just talking about a civil lawsuit. We're talking about a federal investigation into the Aurelia's employment practices. Grace's mind spun. But Mr. Harrison said the hotel is on my side. Harrison is on your side, Judge Carter confirmed. So is the owner, Rebecca Chen. I met with her an hour ago. She's horrified by what's been happening under her roof. She's already begun termination proceedings against Thornfield. They're evicting him? Grace couldn't believe it. Evicting him, banning him from the property, and cooperating fully with the federal investigation. Michelle's smile was sharp. And here's the beautiful part. Thornfield's countersuit? The one claiming you assaulted him? That's going to backfire spectacularly, because now he's on record lying about a federal investigation. Judge Carter stood, walking to the window. Grace, I need to be honest with you about something. This case is bigger than just you and Thornfield. The Aurelia is one of dozens of luxury hotels where wealthy guests have been abusing staff for years, knowing they're too powerful to face consequences. He turned back to her. But consequences are coming. For Thornfield, for others like him, for a system that's protected abusers for too long. What do you need from me? Grace asked quietly. Your testimony, your truth, your willingness to stand up and say, this happened, it was wrong, and I deserve justice. Michelle pulled out a document. If you agree, we'll file a formal complaint tomorrow. Federal civil rights violation, workplace harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and we'll win. Grace looked at the document. Her hands trembled. What if I lose my job? You won't, Judge Carter said firmly. Rebecca Chen has guaranteed your employment in writing. She's also promoting you to training supervisor, a new position she's creating specifically to help develop better protocols for protecting staff from guest abuse. Grace's eyes widened. She's promoting me? She's making you part of the solution, Michelle said. But Grace, understand, this fight won't be easy. Thornfield has money, lawyers, and connections. He'll try to destroy your credibility, attack your character, make your life difficult. But he'll lose, Judge Carter added, because he made one fatal mistake. What mistake? Grace whispered. Judge Carter's smile was cold and satisfied. He forgot that power without compassion is just cruelty, and cruelty always has consequences. Grace took the pen Michelle offered. Her hand shook as she signed her name at the bottom of the complaint. She didn't know it yet, but that signature would change everything, not just for her or Thornfield or the Aurelia, for everyone who'd ever been humiliated by someone who thought wealth made them untouchable. The revolution had begun, and Richard Thornfield III was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. The news broke at 6 p.m., not through official channels, through whispers, phone calls, urgent texts between staff members. By 6:30, every employee at the Aurelia knew Richard Thornfield III had been served eviction papers. Grace heard about it from Maria, who'd heard it from security, who'd witnessed the moment Thornfield opened his door to find 2 attorneys and a hotel security supervisor standing in the hallway with legal documents. They say he went pale, Maria reported, her eyes gleaming. Just stood there reading the papers, hands shaking. Then he slammed the door in their faces. Grace sat in the break room, her untouched coffee growing cold. This is really happening. It's really happening. Maria squeezed her hand. You started something, Grace. Something big. But Grace didn't feel victorious. She felt terrified, because men like Richard Thornfield didn't just accept defeat. They fought back. At 7:15 p.m., Thornfield's response arrived. Not legally. That would come later. This was personal. Harrison's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he recognized immediately. The mayor's office. David, it's Stephen, the mayor's chief of staff. Thornfield's former roommate from Yale. We need to talk about this situation with Richard. Harrison's jaw tightened. There's nothing to discuss, Stephen. Mr. Thornfield violated hotel policy. The decision is final. Is it? Stephen's voice carried an edge. Because Richard tells me this entire situation is fabricated, that he's being targeted by a rogue federal judge with a political agenda, that an incompetent employee nearly injured him, and when he rightfully complained, the hotel chose to side with, stop. Harrison's voice cut like a blade. I've seen the security footage, multiple angles. I've read 17 previous complaints against Thornfield. I've spoken with staff members who were too afraid to report his behavior. This isn't fabrication, Stephen. This is documentation. Silence. Then, the mayor values his relationship with Richard. Richard's donations to the city's youth programs alone. Don't. Harrison stood pacing his office. Don't tell me about his charitable donations while ignoring how he treats the people who serve him. Those donations don't buy him the right to racially harass my staff. Racially harass? That's a serious accusation. It's a documented fact. Judge James Carter witnessed it. He's prepared to testify. So are multiple other guests. Harrison's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Stephen, tell the mayor this. The Aurelia will not be intimidated. Not by political pressure. Not by wealthy donors. Not by anyone. He ended the call. His hands were shaking. The phone rang again immediately. This time a corporate attorney from Thornfield's hedge fund. Then a real estate developer who owned 3 properties near the Aurelia. Then a society columnist from the Times, asking for comment on rumors of discrimination against a prominent businessman. Thornfield was calling in every favor he had, activating every connection, applying pressure from every angle. The war had begun. Grace didn't learn about the pressure campaign until the next morning. She arrived at work to find Harrison waiting by the employee entrance, his expression grim. Grace, we need to talk. Her stomach dropped. Am I fired? No. Harrison guided her away from other staff members. But Thornfield is pushing back hard. Very hard. He's claiming you deliberately attacked him, that you have a history of accidents, that you're being manipulated by Judge Carter for a political agenda. That's all lies. I know. But he's got powerful friends making those lies sound credible. Harrison handed her a folder. His lawyers filed this an hour ago. Countersuit for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation. Grace's hands trembled as she read. The lawsuit claimed she'd violently and deliberately struck Thornfield with her cart, causing severe emotional trauma and reputational damage. It sought $3 million in damages. $3 million? Grace couldn't breathe. I don't have $3 million, I don't have 3,000. Grace, breathe. Harrison's voice was firm. This is a bullying tactic. It's designed to scare you into dropping your complaint. But you have Attorney Thompson, you have Judge Carter's testimony, and you have hotel security footage that proves every claim in this lawsuit is false. But what if? No. Harrison interrupted. Don't give him that power. Don't let fear win. That's exactly what he wants. Grace looked at the papers again. Her name printed in legal documents. Accused of assault, of lying, of being a pawn in some political game. She thought about Carmen, the 19-year-old girl Thornfield had destroyed with false accusations. About Dorothy and Maria, and all the other staff members who'd stayed silent for years because they were afraid. About Judge Carter, who'd spent 2 weeks documenting abuse because he believed justice mattered. I'm not dropping the complaint, Grace said quietly. Harrison smiled. Good, because neither is the hotel. Thornfield's countersuit names the Aurelia as a co-defendant. He's claiming we created a hostile environment for guests. So now we're in this fight together. Judge Carter sat in attorney Michelle Thompson's downtown office, reviewing documents spread across the conference table. Michelle paced while talking on her phone, her expression growing darker with each passing minute. Understood. Thank you. She ended the call and looked at Judge Carter. Thornfield's team is good. Very good. They've already leaked a story to 3 media outlets claiming this is a politically motivated attack. They're framing you as an activist judge, overstepping your authority. Let them. Judge Carter didn't look up from the documents. The facts don't change based on their spin, but public perception matters. If they convince people this is about politics rather than civil rights. Michelle, Judge Carter finally met her eyes. I've been doing this for 23 years. I've faced smear campaigns before. What matters isn't what Thornfield's PR team says. What matters is what we can prove in court. He tapped one document. Carmen Rodriguez, falsely accused of theft. Fired without proper investigation. now working 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet. Another document. Dorothy Williams, 15 years at the Aurelia. Thornfield called her illiterate to her face when she couldn't immediately understand his handwritten note. She never reported it. Another. James Chen, fired after Thornfield complained about foreign-looking staff serving him breakfast. Michelle stopped pacing. We have 17 documented cases of abuse or discrimination. 18, counting Grace. Judge Carter leaned back. Thornfield didn't just harass one employee. He created a pattern of behavior spanning 7 years, and hotel management knew about it but did nothing because he was wealthy. Until now. Until now. Judge Carter's expression was thoughtful. Rebecca Chen is different. She actually cares, but she's one person fighting decades of institutional acceptance of abuse. This case isn't just about Thornfield. It's about changing a culture that values money over humanity. Michelle's phone buzzed. She read the message and swore softly. Thornfield just hired Marcus Blackwell. Judge Carter's eyebrows rose. Marcus Blackwell was legendary. The attorney who'd successfully defended 3 Fortune 500 CEOs accused of discrimination, who'd gotten a sitting senator acquitted of harassment charges, who'd never lost a civil rights case in 20 years. He's expensive, Michelle said. We're talking $5,000 per hour expensive, which tells us Thornfield is scared. Judge Carter smiled slightly. Good. He should be. At 3:00 p.m., Grace met with Michelle Thompson at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Aurelia. Michelle had insisted on meeting off hotel property. Fewer chances of being observed, she'd explained. Now sitting across from this confident attorney, Grace felt like she was drowning. They're going to destroy me, Grace said quietly. Thornfield's lawyers. They'll find everything wrong I've ever done. Every mistake. Grace. Michelle's voice was gentle but firm. I've reviewed your entire employment history. You've been written up exactly once in 3 years, for being 10 minutes late during a snowstorm. Your performance reviews are exemplary. Your co-workers respect you. You're a single mother raising a daughter while working full-time and taking online classes toward your degree. Grace blinked. How do you know about my daughter? Because I do my homework, and because your story matters. Michelle leaned forward. Grace, Thornfield's lawyers are going to try to paint you as incompetent, as careless, as someone with an agenda. But here's what they can't dispute. You were doing your job when Thornfield verbally attacked you using racially charged language. That's not opinion. That's fact. Witnessed by a federal judge and documented on security footage. But he has Marcus Blackwell, and we have the truth. Michelle's eyes flashed. Blackwell is good. He's won cases he shouldn't have won. But he's never faced me on a case this clear-cut. And he certainly never faced Judge Carter's testimony. Grace wanted to believe her, but fear was a living thing in her chest. What if we lose? We won't. But what if... Grace. Michelle reached across the table, covering Grace's hand with her own. Look at me. Really look at me. Grace met her eyes. I'm the daughter of a domestic worker, Michelle said quietly. My mother cleaned houses in Baltimore for 30 years. She was abused by employers who thought they owned her because they paid her wages. When I was 16, I watched a wealthy woman accuse my mother of stealing a necklace. The woman found it later, in her own jewelry box. But my mother had already been fired, already been blacklisted. That woman never apologized. Michelle's grip tightened. I became a lawyer because of my mother, because I swore that no one else's mother would face what mine faced without someone fighting for them. So when I tell you we won't lose, I'm not being optimistic, I'm being honest, because losing isn't an option. Not for you, not for Carmen, not for any of the people Thornfield has hurt. Tears rolled down Grace's cheeks. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Michelle released her hand and pulled out her laptop. Thank me when Thornfield pays. Now, let's prepare for your deposition, because Blackwell's going to come at you hard, and we're going to make sure you're ready. That night at 11:47 p.m., Grace's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Heavy breathing. Then a voice. Disguised, muffled. Drop the lawsuit, or your daughter will regret it. The line went dead. Grace sat frozen in her dark apartment, phone clutched in her shaking hand. She thought about Melissa, her 9-year-old daughter, asleep in the next room. Thought about what that voice had implied. She called Michelle Thompson, then Judge Carter, then hotel security. By 1 a.m., police were at her apartment taking a statement. By 2 a.m., a patrol car was stationed outside her building. By 3:00 a.m., Michelle had filed an emergency motion for a protective order. And by 4:00 a.m., Grace Miller understood something with crystal clarity. Richard Thornfield III wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to destroy her. The question was, would she let him? The threatening phone call changed everything. What had been a civil lawsuit transformed overnight into a criminal investigation. Detective Sarah Martinez from the NYPD's Special Victims Unit sat across from Grace at 9:00 a.m., her expression serious. "Ms. Miller, threatening a witness in a federal civil rights case is a serious crime. We're treating this with maximum priority." Detective Martinez had kind eyes but a steel voice. "We're already working on tracing the call. We've also assigned protection to you and your daughter." Grace nodded numbly. She hadn't slept. Every sound in her apartment had made her jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. Melissa had asked why the police car was outside. Grace had told her it was just a precaution, nothing to worry about. The lie tasted bitter. "There's something else," Detective Martinez continued. "This threat? It's actually helpful to your case. Whoever made it committed a felony. And if we can prove it's connected to Thornfield, you think he made the call?" Grace's voice cracked. "Directly? Unlikely. Men like Thornfield don't do their own dirty work." Martinez pulled out her tablet, showing Grace a series of photos. "But we're looking at his associates. His private investigator has a record, 2 assault charges, 1 conviction for intimidation. His personal attorney has been sanctioned 3 times for witness tampering." Grace stared at the photos. These were the people Thornfield surrounded himself with. People who threatened single mothers, people who played dirty. "I'm scared," Grace admitted. "You should be." Martinez's honesty was somehow comforting. These people play for keeps. "But Grace, so do we. And you've got something they don't." "What's that?" "You've got the law on your side. You've got Judge Carter's testimony. You've got evidence. And now you've got proof that someone's desperate enough to threaten you, which tells me you're winning." At the Aurelia, chaos reigned. News of the threatening phone call had leaked, probably through police scanners, and media had descended. News vans lined the street outside. Reporters shouted questions at anyone entering or leaving the building. Harrison stood in the lobby, watching the circus through the glass doors. Rebecca Chen appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. "This is getting worse," Harrison said quietly. "No," Rebecca's voice was firm. "This is getting public. There's a difference. Worse would be if we'd stayed silent and let Thornfield continue abusing people. Public means accountability." A reporter knocked on the glass, holding up a microphone. Harrison ignored him. "Thornfield's attorney called," Rebecca continued. "Marcus Blackwell. He wants to negotiate a settlement." Harrison turned to her, surprised. Already. He's offering Grace Miller $200,000 to drop her complaint and sign a non-disclosure agreement." $200,000? Harrison's eyebrows rose. "That's a fraction of what they'd pay if this goes to trial and they lose." Rebecca's smile was cold. "It's also an admission of weakness. They're scared." "Will Grace take it?" Rebecca shook her head. "I spoke with Attorney Thompson." Grace refused without hesitation, said this isn't about money. It's about dignity, about making sure Thornfield can't do this to anyone else. Harrison felt a surge of respect for the quiet housekeeper who'd somehow become the center of this storm. She's braver than most people would be. She's braver than she knows. Rebecca watched the reporters outside. "But Harrison, we need to prepare for this to get uglier before it gets better. Thornfield's desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things." Judge Carter sat in a secure conference room at the federal courthouse, reviewing phone records with FBI Special Agent Marcus Reed. The threatening call to Grace had triggered federal jurisdiction. Witness intimidation in a civil rights case was Reed's specialty. The call was made from a burner phone, Reed explained, pointing to data on his laptop screen, purchased with cash at a convenience store in Queens. But here's where it gets interesting. The store's across the street from the office building where Thornfield's private investigator works. Judge Carter leaned forward. "Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences." Reed pulled up more data. "We've also been tracking Thornfield's communications. He's made 17 calls to his PI in the past 48 hours, each one lasting less than 30 seconds. Classic behavior for someone trying to avoid surveillance. Can you prove he ordered the threat? Not yet, but we're building a pattern." Reed switched screens. "We've also uncovered something else. Thornfield's been liquidating assets. Sold 2 properties in the past week. Moved significant funds offshore. He's preparing for a big payout." Judge Carter's expression darkened. "Or he's planning to run. That's what I'm thinking." Reed closed his laptop. "Judge, off the record? I've been investigating financial crimes for 15 years. I've seen powerful people do terrible things to protect their wealth and reputation. But threatening a single mother? That's a new low. Even for this crowd. Power corrupts, Judge Carter said quietly. But it also reveals. Thornfield's true character is showing now, and it's uglier than anyone imagined. Grace returned to work 3 days after the threat. The decision wasn't easy. Michelle Thompson had advised her to take leave, to stay home where protection was easier. But Grace refused. "I won't hide," she'd told Michelle. "If I hide, he wins. He gets to control my life, my choices. I won't give him that power." So she clocked in at 5:30 a.m., wearing her navy blue uniform, pushing her cleaning cart through the same hallways she'd walked 1,000 times before. But everything felt different now. Security guards nodded to her. Other staff members offered quiet words of support. Even guests seemed to know who she was. Some smiled encouragingly, others averted their eyes uncomfortably. She was no longer invisible. At 7:45 a.m., Grace was cleaning the executive conference room on the 3rd floor when she heard voices in the hallway. Raised voices, angry. "Don't care what it costs, I want that woman destroyed." Grace froze. She recognized that voice. Thornfield. "Richard, you need to calm down." Another voice. Older. Smoother. Marcus Blackwell, the legendary attorney. "You're not helping yourself by what? By demanding justice? That maid assaulted me, and now she's being treated like a hero while I'm being evicted from my own property." Grace moved closer to the door, her heart pounding. She shouldn't eavesdrop, but she couldn't help it. "The optics are terrible," Blackwell was saying. "A wealthy white man versus a black single mother, with a federal judge as witness? Richard, we need to settle this quietly. The $200,000 offer." She refused it. Thornfield's voice was shrill. "She actually refused it. Do you know what that means? She's not interested in money. She wants to humiliate me. She wants accountability." A third voice. Female. Calm. Grace's breath caught. "Rebecca Chen. Something you've avoided your entire life." Silence. Then Thornfield. "What are you doing here?" "This is my hotel, Richard. I can go anywhere I please." Rebecca's voice was ice. "I came to personally inform you that your appeal of the eviction has been denied. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Security will assist you with your belongings." "You can't do this. I own that suite. You own the right to reside there subject to hotel bylaws. Bylaws which you violated repeatedly." Rebecca's footsteps approached the conference room door. Grace quickly moved away, pretending to dust. 7 years, Richard. 7 years of complaints. 7 years of staff members too afraid to report your abuse. That ends now. "I'll sue you. I'll sue this entire hotel. You'll lose." Rebecca's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Because I'm not a housekeeper you can intimidate. I'm not a server you can threaten. I'm a billionaire who's very angry about what's been happening in her hotel. And unlike you, Richard, I actually earned my money instead of inheriting it." Grace heard footsteps retreating. Then Thornfield's voice, desperate. "Marcus, do something." "I'm trying." Blackwell sounded exhausted. "But Richard, you need to understand. Threatening that woman was the worst thing you could have done. It turned a civil case into a criminal investigation. The FBI is involved now. If they prove you ordered that call—" "I didn't." "Then who did?" Blackwell's question hung in the air. "Because someone made that threat. Someone with access to your investigator. Someone who knew about the lawsuit. If it wasn't you, you need to figure out who it was, fast." Their voices faded as they walked away. Grace stood alone in the conference room, dust cloth forgotten in her hand. She'd heard everything. Thornfield's desperation, his rage, his fear. He was unraveling. That afternoon, Michelle Thompson called an emergency meeting. Grace, Judge Carter, Harrison, and Rebecca Chen gathered in Michelle's office. The attorney's expression was grim. "We have a development," Michelle said. 2 developments, actually. First, the FBI traced the threatening call. It came from Thornfield's private investigator's phone. They have proof. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. They can prove it? Not just the call. They found text messages between Thornfield and his PI discussing applying pressure and making the problem go away. It's not a direct order to threaten you, but it's close enough. The FBI is preparing charges. Judge Carter's expression was satisfied. Criminal charges will strengthen our civil case considerably. There's more. Michelle pulled up a document on her laptop. We received this an hour ago. A settlement offer, new terms. She turned the screen so everyone could see. Grace's eyes widened. $5 million? She whispered. $5 million to Grace? $2 million to the Aurelia for legal costs and damages, a formal public apology from Thornfield, and, this is the important part, a requirement that Thornfield establish a $10 million fund for hospitality worker protection and education. The room was silent. $17 million total, Harrison said slowly. That's desperation. Rebecca's voice was sharp. He knows he's going to lose. He knows the criminal charges are coming. This is his attempt to control the narrative. Pay enough money that it looks generous, make a public apology that lets him claim redemption, and hope the story goes away. What do you recommend? Grace asked Michelle. The attorney was quiet for a moment. Legally, it's a strong offer. $5 million is life-changing money, Grace. You could pay off debt, secure your daughter's future, never worry about rent again. The Worker Protection Fund could help thousands of people. But, Grace heard the hesitation in Michelle's voice, but it comes with conditions. You'd have to sign an NDA. You couldn't speak publicly about what happened. Thornfield would control the narrative, paint himself as someone who made a mistake and made amends. Michelle met Grace's eyes. You'd be silenced. Again. Grace looked at Judge Carter. What do you think? I think the decision is yours. His voice was gentle. I can't tell you what to do, Grace. This is your life, your future, your choice. But I can tell you this. Money is temporary. Justice is permanent. Whichever you choose, make sure you can live with it. Grace thought about Melissa, about stability, about never having to worry whether she could afford her daughter's school supplies or doctor's visits. $5 million would change everything. But she also thought about Carmen, who'd lost her job over false accusations, about Dorothy, who'd been called illiterate, about all the other workers Thornfield had humiliated over the years, about the next person he'd abuse if someone didn't stop him. She thought about that moment in the lobby, the shame, the fear, the feeling of being invisible, worthless, less than, and she thought about Judge Carter's words. Sometimes the bravest thing is just standing there with dignity while someone tries to take it from you. Grace took a deep breath. I want to go to trial. Michelle's eyebrows rose. Grace, are you sure? $5 million? I'm sure. Grace's voice was steady. Because this isn't about me anymore. It's about every person who's been treated like garbage by someone who thinks money makes them better. It's about standing up and saying, no more. Rebecca Chen smiled. A genuine smile. You're remarkable, Grace Miller. I'm just tired of being invisible. Grace met everyone's eyes. Thornfield called me you people. Made me feel like I didn't belong, like I didn't matter. Her voice strengthened. But I do belong. I do matter. And I'm going to make sure he never forgets it. Judge Carter nodded slowly. Then we go to trial. And we win. Richard Thornfield III sat alone in his penthouse suite, surrounded by packed boxes. The eviction deadline was approaching. His attorney had just called with Grace's response to the settlement offer. She'd refused $17 million. Thornfield couldn't comprehend it. Everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought. That was the fundamental rule he'd lived by his entire life. But Grace Miller had broken that rule. And in doing so, she'd terrified him. Because if money couldn't make this go away, what could? His phone rang. The private investigator. Thornfield answered. Tell me you have good news. I have bad news. The PI's voice was shaking. The FBI just raided my office. They have the burner phone. They have our text messages. Mr. Thornfield, they're coming for you. The phone slipped from Thornfield's fingers. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Manhattan. From up here, the city looked beautiful, peaceful, under control. But Thornfield's control was slipping. And for the first time in his privileged, powerful life, he understood something terrible. He was going to lose. Not just the lawsuit, not just his reputation, everything. 3 months later, the federal courthouse in Manhattan was packed. Every seat filled. Reporters lined the back wall. Camera crews waited outside. Cameras weren't allowed in federal court. But the moment the verdict was announced, the world would know. Grace sat at the plaintiff's table beside Michelle Thompson, wearing a simple navy suit that Rebecca Chen had insisted on buying for her. Her hands were folded, calm. But inside, her heart raced. Across the aisle, Richard Thornfield III sat with Marcus Blackwell and a team of 3 other attorneys. Thornfield looked diminished somehow, thinner, older, his silver hair less perfectly styled. The arrogance that had defined him in that lobby 3 months ago had been replaced by something else. Fear. Judge Catherine Morrison presided, a black woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense jurisprudence. She'd made it clear from day one that status and wealth would carry no weight in her courtroom. Only evidence mattered, and the evidence had been devastating. Michelle had spent 2 weeks presenting the case. Security footage showing the minor cart bump followed by Thornfield's explosion. Audio recordings of his exact words, "You people don't belong here." Unqualified staff. Testimony from 17 hotel employees about years of abuse. Carmen Rodriguez had taken the stand, describing how Thornfield's false accusations had destroyed her career. Dorothy Williams had testified about being called illiterate. James Chen had explained being fired after Thornfield's complaints about foreign-looking staff. One by one, victims had come forward, no longer afraid, and then Judge James Carter had testified. For 3 hours, he'd calmly, methodically described what he'd witnessed: the harassment, the racial undertones, the abuse of power. His testimony had been so precise, so unassailable, that even Blackwell had seemed reluctant to cross-examine. "Your Honor," Blackwell had said carefully, "with all respect to Judge Carter's distinguished career, isn't it possible his interpretation of my client's words was colored by what, Counselor?" Judge Morrison's voice had been sharp. "By his 23 years on the federal bench? By his expertise in civil rights law? By the fact that he's a credible witness who happens to be a sitting federal judge?" Blackwell had sat down, but the most powerful testimony had come from Grace herself. Michelle had prepared her carefully, but when Grace took the stand, she'd spoken from the heart. "He made me feel like I didn't exist," Grace had said, her voice steady despite tears in her eyes. "Like I was nothing. Like because I cleaned rooms for a living, because of the color of my skin, I didn't deserve basic respect. I've worked hard my entire life. I'm a good mother. I'm a good employee. But in that moment, Mr. Thornfield made me feel worthless." She'd looked directly at Thornfield. "I don't hate you, Mr. Thornfield. I pity you, because you have so much money, so much privilege, but you don't have something more important. You don't have humanity." The courtroom had been silent. Even Blackwell hadn't attempted to shake her testimony during cross-examination. The final blow had come from the FBI. Special Agent Reed had testified about the threatening phone call, the burner phone purchased near Thornfield's investigator's office, the text messages discussing applying pressure. While they couldn't prove Thornfield had directly ordered the threat, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Thornfield's private investigator had already pleaded guilty to witness intimidation. He'd received 2 years in prison. He hadn't implicated Thornfield. Loyalty or fear or perhaps a promised payout when this was over. But the connection was clear. Now, after 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments had concluded. The jury had deliberated for 2 days. And this morning, word had come. They'd reached a verdict. Judge Morrison looked at the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor. Please read it." The foreman stood holding a piece of paper. His hands didn't shake. "In the case of Miller versus Thornfield on the count of violation of civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Grace Miller." Grace's breath caught. Michelle squeezed her hand. "On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff." The foreman continued reading, count after count, every single one, in Grace's favor. "As to damages," the foreman said, "we award the plaintiff $2 million in compensatory damages and," he paused, $8 million in punitive damages. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "Order! $10 million. The jury had awarded Grace $10 million. But Grace wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about that moment in the lobby, about standing there while Thornfield tore her apart, about feeling invisible. She wasn't invisible anymore. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded them. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Michelle held up a hand, calling for quiet. "Today, justice was served," Michelle said, her voice clear and strong. "Not just for Grace Miller, but for every service worker who's been abused by powerful people who think wealth exempts them from basic decency. This verdict sends a clear message. Discrimination has consequences. Harassment has consequences. Cruelty has consequences." She stepped aside, gesturing for Grace to speak. Grace had prepared remarks, but standing there facing the cameras, she forgot them all. "I just want to say thank you," Grace began. "Thank you to Judge Carter, who stood up when no one else would. Thank you to Attorney Thompson, who fought for me like I mattered. Thank you to Rebecca Chen and the Aurelia, who chose to do the right thing even when it was difficult." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 3 months ago, I was invisible, just another housekeeper in a fancy hotel. Someone powerful thought he could humiliate me without consequences. But he was wrong, because every person matters. Every person deserves dignity, and no amount of money, no amount of power gives anyone the right to treat another human being as less than. A reporter shouted a question. "Ms. Miller, what will you do with the $10 million? Grace smiled, a genuine smile. "First, I'm going to secure my daughter's future. College fund, home, stability. Everything I couldn't give her before. Then I'm going to donate $2 million to establish a worker advocacy fund at the Aurelia to help other employees who face discrimination or harassment. And finally," she looked directly into the cameras, "I'm going back to work because I'm proud of what I do. I'm proud of who I am, and no one will ever make me feel ashamed of that again." Richard Thornfield III didn't attend the post-verdict press conference. He left through a side entrance, escorted by security, avoiding cameras. His attorney read a brief statement. Mr. Thornfield disagrees with the verdict and is considering his appeal options. But everyone knew the truth. Thornfield was finished. The $10 million judgment was just the beginning. The Aurelia had filed a separate lawsuit for reputational damages. The IRS had opened an investigation into his offshore accounts, triggered by the FBI's findings. 3 of his hedge fund clients had already withdrawn their money, citing ethical concerns. Most devastating of all, Thornfield's son, Richard Thornfield IV, had called a press conference of his own. Standing outside the family's estate in Connecticut, the younger Thornfield had announced he was resigning from his father's company and issuing a public apology to Grace Miller. "My father's behavior was inexcusable," Richard IV had said, his voice tight with emotion. "It doesn't represent who I am or who our family should be. I'm ashamed, and I'm committed to doing better." The family name that Thornfield had spent his life protecting was now synonymous with racism, abuse, and the dangers of unchecked privilege. He'd lost everything, not because of one mistake, but because of years of cruelty finally catching up to him. 6 months after the verdict, Grace stood in her new office at the Aurelia, not a supply closet, an actual office on the 2nd floor, with a window overlooking the park. A brass nameplate on the door read, "Grace Miller, Director of Employee Advocacy and Workplace Dignity." Rebecca Chen had created the position specifically for Grace. Her job was simple yet revolutionary: ensure that every employee at the Aurelia was treated with respect, regardless of their position. Investigate complaints. Implement training programs. Make sure what happened to her never happened to anyone else. Grace had accepted the role on one condition. She still spent 1 day a week cleaning rooms. "I don't ever want to forget where I came from," she'd told Rebecca. "And I want every housekeeper, every server, every staff member to know I understand their work because I do it too." Today, Grace was training new employees on workplace dignity protocols. 23 people sat in the conference room listening intently as she spoke. "You matter," Grace told them. "Your work matters. Your dignity matters. And if anyone, guest or colleague, ever makes you feel otherwise, you report it immediately. Not because you're weak, because you're strong enough to know you deserve better." After the training, Grace returned to her office to find Judge James Carter waiting in the hallway. Judge Carter! Grace hadn't seen him since the verdict. He'd retired from the bench shortly after, citing plans to focus on advocacy work. "Just James now," he said with a smile. "No more Judge. I came to see how you're doing." "I'm good." Grace gestured to her office. "Really good, actually. This job, what we're building here, it feels important. It is important." James followed her inside. "Grace, I wanted you to know, the Aurelia isn't the only hotel implementing changes. Your case has become a turning point. Hotels across the country are revising their policies, establishing worker protection programs, taking harassment complaints seriously." He paused. "You started a movement." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I just wanted justice, and you got it. But you also got something more. You changed the conversation." James's expression was proud. "People are talking about dignity in the workplace, about how wealth doesn't excuse cruelty, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. That's your legacy, Grace." They talked for another hour, about Melissa, thriving in her new private school, about Carmen Rodriguez, who Grace had hired as her assistant, about Dorothy Williams, promoted to head of housekeeping training, about all the lives that had changed because one woman refused to stay silent. When James left, Grace stood at her window, looking out over Central Park. From here, the city looked beautiful, full of possibility. She thought about that morning 3 months ago. The cart, Thornfield's rage, the shame that had threatened to consume her. And she thought about Judge Carter's quiet voice cutting through the chaos. It means treating people with basic human dignity. Such simple words. But they'd changed everything. Richard Thornfield III never appealed the verdict. His attorneys had advised him that an appeal would likely fail and cost millions more in legal fees. He paid the judgment, liquidating assets, closing accounts, dismantling the fortune that had defined his identity. He moved out of New York, out of the country actually, to a small apartment in London where no one knew his name or his story, where he could be anonymous, invisible. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 1 year after the verdict, the Aurelia hosted a gala celebrating the Worker Dignity Initiative, the program Grace had developed that was now being implemented in luxury hotels worldwide. 500 people attended, workers, advocates, journalists, even some of the guests who'd witnessed that day in the lobby. Grace gave the keynote speech. She wore a stunning dress, emerald green, designer, something she'd never have imagined owning before. But she'd also kept her housekeeping uniform. It hung in her office closet, a reminder of where she'd been, who she still was underneath everything. A year ago, Grace told the crowd, I was invisible, just another person doing a job that privileged people don't notice until something goes wrong. But I learned something important. Invisible doesn't mean unimportant. Silent doesn't mean powerless. And one voice, speaking truth, can change the world. She looked out at the audience, at Maria and Dorothy and Carmen and all the other housekeepers from the Aurelia, dressed up and proud, at Michelle Thompson, who'd fought for her, at Rebecca Chen, who'd chosen justice over profit, at James Carter, who'd started all of this by simply refusing to stay silent. We all have power, Grace said. Power to speak up, power to stand up, power to demand dignity, not just for ourselves but for everyone. That's what today is about. Not celebrating me, but celebrating the idea that every person, regardless of their job or their background or the color of their skin, deserves to be treated with respect. The applause was thunderous. Later, as the gala wound down, Grace found herself alone on the Aurelia's terrace, looking out over the city lights. A year ago, she'd been afraid, ashamed, invisible. Now, she was free. Beautiful night. James Carter joined her at the railing. Beautiful life, Grace corrected. They stood in comfortable silence watching the city below. Somewhere out there, other people were being mistreated by those in power. Other injustices were happening. The fight wasn't over. But tonight, Grace Miller had won. Not just in court, not just financially. She'd won something more important. Her dignity, her voice, her power. And she'd shown the world that money doesn't buy the right to dehumanize anyone. That cruelty has consequences. That one person standing up at the right moment can change everything. The revolution had started in a hotel lobby with a cleaning cart and a millionaire's rage. It had ended with justice served and a reminder that would echo far beyond the Aurelia's marble floors. Every person matters. Every voice counts. And no one should ever be made to feel invisible again. Grace Miller smiled, knowing that tomorrow she'd return to work. She'd train more staff. She'd advocate for more workers. She'd continue fighting, because some battles end with verdicts. But the war for dignity, that never stops. And Grace was just getting started. 5 years later, Grace stood in front of a congressional committee in Washington, D.C. The Worker Protection and Dignity Act. Legislation inspired by her case was up for a vote. She'd been invited to testify. My name is Grace Miller, she began, her voice steady. 5 years ago, I was a housekeeper making minimum wage, raising my daughter alone, invisible to most of the world. Today I'm here because one moment of cruelty became a catalyst for change. She looked at the senators before her. The Miller v. Thornfield case wasn't just about one millionaire and one maid. It was about a system that protected abusers and silenced victims, about workplaces where dignity was optional for the wealthy but required from everyone else. Grace pulled out a folder. Since that verdict, 43 hotels have implemented worker advocacy programs. Harassment complaints in the hospitality industry have increased by 300%. Not because abuse increased, but because people finally feel safe reporting it. And most importantly, 217 workers have successfully sued their employers for discrimination, citing my case as precedent. A senator leaned forward. Ms. Miller, some argue this legislation will hurt businesses. What's your response? Grace smiled. Senator, treating people with dignity doesn't hurt business. It improves it. Employee retention at the Aurelia is up 62%. Guest satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. When workers feel respected, everyone benefits. The vote came 3 days later. The Worker Protection and Dignity Act passed 67-33. Grace watched from the gallery as President signed it into law. Melissa, now 14 and dreaming of becoming a civil rights attorney, squeezed her mother's hand. "You did it, Mom." Grace shook her head. "We did it. Everyone who refused to stay silent. Everyone who stood up." That evening, Grace's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Old habits died hard, but something made her pick up. "Grace? It's Richard Thornfield." Grace's breath caught. 5 years of silence. 5 years since the verdict, and now this call. "I'm calling to apologize. His voice was different, quieter, stripped of arrogance. "I know it's too late. I know I can't undo what I did, but I needed you to know. You were right. About everything. I was cruel. I was racist. I used my power to hurt people who couldn't fight back." Grace listened, saying nothing. "I've spent 5 years in therapy," Thornfield continued, "working on myself, understanding why I behaved that way. It doesn't excuse anything, but I wanted you to know that what you did, standing up to me, it changed my life too. Not in ways I wanted, but in ways I needed." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Mr. Thornfield, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." She hung up feeling lighter. The anger she'd carried was finally gone. Not because Thornfield apologized, but because she'd already won the only battle that mattered, the fight for her own dignity. Grace looked at Melissa, at the life they'd built, at the movement that had started with one woman refusing to be invisible. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with redemption. Not for Thornfield, but for every person who'd ever been made to feel less than. Grace Miller had started as a housekeeper in a hotel lobby. She'd become a voice for the voiceless, and her story would echo for generations.